everyone, and welcome to the City Futures Research Centre seminar series. I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional land of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as to any First Nations peoples joining us today. If you are joining online, please mute your microphone and turn off your cameras during the presentation. Once we get to the Q&A, you're welcome to turn your cameras back on and unmute yourself. You can also put a question in the chat and we'll be monitoring the chat for questions throughout the presentation as well. Now I'd like to hand over to Professor Hazel Easthope, who will introduce today's speaker.
Everyone, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Yunzheng, who is a PhD candidate at City Futures and also my student, also Chris Martin's student. Chris is currently at a conference in France, sweltering, so he's not here today. Sends his regards. Yunzheng's pretty much at the end of her PhD journey, and she's going to present to us today a paper that she wrote essentially on some interesting things she found along the way. I think it's I've read the paper, I think it's a really fascinating story about the experiences of migrants moving from rural to urban areas in China. So Yunzheng, please welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Yunzheng Zhang. I'm a PhD student supervised by Professor Hazel Easthope and Dr. Chris Martin. Today, I'm going to share a working paper for my thesis. Its title is Returning to My Roots, Unpacking the Relationship Between Hometown Housing and Ontological Security Among China's Internal Migrant Workers. Agenda. First, I would like to share something about the background. First, I would like to introduce a key concept in migration and housing literature. It's ontological security. It refers to a sense of confidence, continuity, and trust in the world. For migrants, their life may be mobile and turbulent, and if they can attain ontological security, they may have better well-being. According to some housing scholars, home can be a place where ontological security is attained. And in existing literature, most housing scholars have centered on how migrants' ontological security is related to their dwellings in the host city. This seems to be based on the premise that migration is a one-off event. Migrants migrate to a new city and then settle down. However, the relationship between migrants' ontological security and their housing in the hometown has received limited attention. Then I would like to introduce the background of China's internal migration. China used to adopt a planned economy during 1949 and 1978. And since the late 1970s, there has been a mass increase in internal migration. Many people migrate from rural regions to urban regions, shifting from agricultural work to industrial and service work. This is what we call rural to urban migrants. And in recent decades, there have been an increase in urban to urban migrants. Some people move from less developed cities to developed ones for more economic opportunities. And when exploring China's internal migration, an important system that we need to know about is the hukou system. It is the household registration system in China. It determines people's access to welfare, including housing support. For example, hukou can be categorized into local and non-local hukou. if a person has a local hukou in a city, then he has the eligibility to apply for housing support and access other welfare. And in some big cities, only those with local hukou have the ability to have the eligibility to buy housing. For those without local hukou, they cannot access welfare and housing support. And the transfer of hukou can be very difficult for less skilled migrants because it's like the PR system in Australia. Only if a person has received good education and has some skills, then they may be scored higher and are more likely to have to transfer their hukou into big cities. However, if they are less skilled workers and do not and have not received enough education, then the whole city, especially those big cities, will prohibit them from transferring their hukou. Hukou can also be categorized into rural and urban hukou. China adopts an urban-rural dichotomy in land tenure. In rural regions, the land is owned by rural collectives, and villagers can acquire land for unlimited time of use, and they can build housing on the land. However, in urban regions, the land is owned by the state and leased to housing developers for a limited time, for limited years. For example, if the land is for residential purpose, then when there's housing constructed on the land, the housing has a property right of 70 years. And some people with a rural background may feel urban housing tenure as incredible because it seems to last for a short time. As I mentioned earlier, the investigation of migrants' ontological security and their housing in the host city seems to be based on the premise that migrants migrate and settle down in the host city. However, in reality, some migrants only migrate for work, and they may shift work between different cities and may return to their hometown one day. The return to one's hometown can be observed across the world. For example, Greece used to experience a back to the countryside movement during the economic recession from 2008 to 2014. And in Spain, populations from small cities have been increasing since 2018. And this trend was reinforced by the COVID-19 pandemic. In China, there's a recent trend of county fever, which means a growing trend of returning to one's hometown. This can be attributed to various reasons. For example, the housing costs and other living costs in big cities are too high to afford, and people cannot find enough economic opportunities or employment opportunities in big cities. And also, over years of development, the regional disparity in infrastructure and economic opportunities between developed regions and less developed regions has partially mitigated. And some people can also find economic opportunities for livelihood in their hometown. So there's a growing trend of returning to one's hometown. Then I started wondering, can ontological security of China's internal migrants related to housing in their hometown? I started thinking about how hometown and hometown housing matter in China's culture. Many years ago, some Chinese people migrated overseas to make a living and send remittance back to their rural hometown for their family members to build housing and attend schools. And after they die, their bone ash will be buried in the land in their rural hometown because it is believed that this can make their soul rest in peace. In contemporary China, there is a spring travel rush every year during Spring Festival. Migrants working in different cities will return to their hometown and gather together with other family members in the housing in their hometown. This is the most important moment for a year for the family reunion. So I proposed the research question. How is the ontological security of China's internal migrants related to housing in their hometown? To address this question, I used interview data from 24 migrant workers in Guangzhou and Shenzhen. Guangzhou and Shenzhen are two big cities in South China with significant migrant inflow. Among my interviewees, 16 of them are skilled migrants and 8 of them are less skilled migrants from rural to urban regions. After reviewing the interview data, I categorized them into 3 narratives. The first one is we go back home together. It refers to hometown housing ownership and the associated higher quality of life. The second narrative is only the land you own belongs to you. It refers to migrants who have a rural background, view urban housing tenure as incredible. The third narrative is a married daughter has no home. It shares a story about a divorced female migrant who are duly excluded from housing support in both the host city and her hometown. And for each narrative, I will use a framework proposed by previous scholars. The framework includes 4 dimensions. It decomposes home as the site of constancy, the spatial context of daily routines, a site of control, and a secure base for the construction of identity. I will see whether the interview data pour into the 4 dimensions. Let's go to the first story. We go back home together. One migrant I interviewed is a less skilled migrant, migrating from rural to urban region. She adopts temporary work in a factory because she needs to take care of her children in the hometown for half a year every year. And her husband works in another city as a construction worker because construction work pay more. This migrant says, we have self-built housing in the villages and commodity housing in the county. Here, commodity housing refers to market housing. This migrant and her husband make a living, make money in the host city and send remittance to build housing and buy commodity housing in the hometown. This is a reflection of the hometown housing as a site of constancy. And she says, we sometimes go to each other's city and sometimes we go back home together. I am not always outside. Sometimes I stay at home for half a year to accompany my children. Sometimes I go out to work. This can be regarded as a reflection of hometown housing as a spatial context of daily routines, especially family daily routines. Because in the host city, this migrant lives in employer-provided housing, which is all work, no life. This migrant also says she needs to make do a little when living with roommates in employer housing, while she has high autonomy in hometown housing. This is because she lives with several people and she needs to be very careful about her behavior in order to maintain a good relationship with her roommates. However, when she go back to the hometown housing, she can do everything she wants and can have a control of her life. Apart from less skilled migrants also share story about their hometown housing ownership and the associated higher quality of life. For example, this migrant says, our house in Chengdu is big, which is around 100 square meters with 3 rooms. I plan to settle in Chengdu in the future. I feel that Shenzhen is only a place for work. Everyone lives a rapid pace of life. Chengdu has more of a livable atmosphere. This can be regarded as hometown and hometown housing as a spatial context of daily routines. It's a more relaxing daily routine. And in the hometown housing, these migrants can feel control of their life instead of being controlled by work. Other skilled migrants also show similar statements. For example, a migrant says, "I may not stay in Shenzhen in the future. I feel that this is a place for work, not for settling down. I may go back to Hubei province then. I may not stay in Shenzhen in the future. It's stressful here. It's only a place for work. I may go back to Dongguan or Jiangxi. My girlfriend and I are from Jiangxi. We both have housing in Dongguan." Now let's go to the second narrative. It's only the land you own belongs to you. In China, in rural regions, the land has no limited time of use, and the villagers can build housing on it. However, in cities, the property right of housing has a 70-year tenure. So some people with a rural background may regard urban housing tenure as incredible. For example, a rural to urban less skilled migrant shares how he and his father view urban housing tenure as incredible. He says, he shares the thoughts of his father. He doesn't want to live in commodity housing, and he doesn't want to buy commodity housing. If you buy commodity housing, it doesn't belong to you, but the homestead belongs to you. Only the land you own belongs to you. For the commodity housing that you buy, you can't live for too long, then it's gone. He also shares his thought on urban housing tenure. I know a lot about the real estate market. The more I know about it, the less I want to buy housing. Because this migrant and his father don't trust urban housing tenure, they have already built housing in the hometown. One of my informants also shares how he views rural land. Our land was there in the Qing dynasty, in the Ming dynasty. It means the land was there in the ancient times. No matter how many years pass, it will always be there. These statements all reflect the rural homestead as a sign of constancy because it will last forever. Another less skilled migrant, rural to urban migrant, also shares his story. He already purchased a small property house in Shenzhen. However, he still wants to build housing in his rural hometown. He shares his story in his childhood. I was quite mature when I was very young. When I was 2 or 3 years old, my parents were always arguing and fighting against each other. When I was 12, we had nothing to eat. I wanted to build a house when I was 15 or 16. My mother lived a hard life. She couldn't get enough nutrition, so I was quite mature when I was 9 years old, and I was doing housework at home before my mother passed away. This migrant wants to build hometown housing not only for the construction of the property, but also he wants to construct his ideal daily routine so that his mother in the heaven can see this ideal life. He also says, I need to find a place to build housing. Homeland is always the homeland. I haven't transferred my hukou. This is a reflection of the rural homestead as a secure base for the construction of identity. If this migrant built housing in his hometown, that means he preserves his membership as a member of that village. Therefore, he wants to build a housing there. And also, this relationship is reinforced by the 户口registration because it is related to the acquisition of land. My informant also shares that some urbanites may commit suicide when they encounter difficulties in life because they have no roots. But if you have land, when you make a great success in your life, then you go back to tell your ancestor you are successful. When you fail in your life, then you go back to make your mind peaceful. You will be in a good mood and be able to start again. For migrants, the world and the life can be uncontrollable and sometimes with challenges. However, when they encounter difficulties, they can return to their rural homestead and then feel a sense of control of their life and gain the courage and gain the spiritual power to start again. The third narrative is a married daughter has no home. One interviewee has intersectional disadvantages. She is a divorced woman, and she is a less skilled migrant from rural to urban regions. In China's rural regions, many parents hold a traditional attitude toward housing. They will give housing to their sons for them to get married. However, they will not give housing to their daughters because they think their daughter's husband will provide housing for marriage. In this case, this migrant cannot get housing from her parents, and she cannot get housing from her husband because she is divorced. She says, a married out daughter is like split water. Married daughter has no home. I have a place to live, but no home, no real home, no home of my own. It's impossible for my parents to give me the house. When I asked her if she will buy a house in the future, she says, I feel like there's no hope for me in my life because I can't earn much money just by living unless I suddenly strike it rich one day, or I won't be able to buy it. This migrant is employed on a temporary contract. This is because some employers of less skilled workers will employ workers on temporary contract to avoid paying housing provident fund for them. In China, housing provident fund is a compulsory fund which requires the employer and the worker to deposit a certain amount of money of their salaries each month to the workers' housing provident fund bank account. However, this will increase the labor cost of the employers. So the employers will avoid using formal contract to employ the workers. Therefore, in this case, the migrant doesn't have a housing provident fund to support buying a house, and she cannot receive enough housing support in her hometown. Therefore, it can be regarded that she is duly excluded from housing support in both the host city and her hometown. Here comes the discussion. The first point is hometown housing as the site of constancy. Most of my interviewees share that hometown housing is an enduring asset and is a backup for their potential return in case of unsuccessful migration. The second point is hometown housing as the spatial context of everyday routine. China adopts a split household strategy in internal migration policies. Many cities only want the most productive member of a family, and they don't want other family members to migrate together because the host city's government can avoid providing social service for the whole family. Therefore, hometown housing and land may serve as the site for family reunions and for routine family life. The third point is hometown housing as a site of control. In the hometown housing and in the rural hometown land, migrants can feel free to share their joys and sorrows and thus obtain the courage to start venturing in the world again. The fourth point is hometown housing as a secure base for identity construction. This is especially true for the second narrative, for those migrants with a rural background who view rural land as long-lasting. Hometown housing can be regarded as a base for identity, and this is situated by the constraints set by hukou, because hukou determines the eligibility of the acquisition of land and housing support. Based on the findings, I discussed two primary policy implications. The first one is hometown housing may take off some of the pressure of dealing with urban housing problems. Among my interviewees, all live in employer-provided housing in Guangzhou and Shenzhen. Although some of them live in disadvantaged conditions, they can still perceive ontological security and feel very optimistic about their life because they know if they have housing in their hometown, they can return at any time. Therefore, the hometown government can consider supporting migrants in buying housing or building housing. The second implication that I want to discuss is about the intersectional disadvantages experienced by some migrants. This will make these migrants duly excluded by the housing support in the host city and the hometown. I would recommend that in the host city, the government can consider implementing enough supervision on employers' behaviors in order to avoid them from employing migrants on a temporary contract in order to escape the Housing Provident Fund payment. And for the government in the hometown, a plausible way is for the hometown government to cooperate with the host city government. In China, the social service and social welfare is closely related to how many years people work. The hometown government can consider collecting information of these migrant workers. And when these migrant workers return to the hometown, they can consider offering some subsidies and providing housing support to help these migrants build housing or buy housing. And this will require some financial investment. It would be viable if the host city government can transfer some social expenditure to the hometown government to cover the housing subsidies. These are all of my presentation. Thank you for listening.
Question. Is there an opportunity now, or is there an increasing opportunity now for migrant workers to find work in their hometowns, their home cities?
When I interviewed some migrants, they say the salaries in the host city are not higher than that in their home city. Mm-hmm. Some of them migrate to the host city because they don't like the kind of work in their hometown. They can actually find opportunities in their hometown, but sometimes it's only their choice.
Is the internal migration highly individualized, or does sometimes groups of people from the hometown go to the same city and create some kind of community there.
This phenomenon is more prevalent in our father generation. For example, if one person in a village migrate to a big city, then he will tell other villagers there's opportunity in the host city and ask them to migrate too. But now I think China is more not as collective as before, and migration seems to be more like an individual decision than before.
Thank you for your presentation. And last year I lived in Shenzhen, and I think an important characteristic of Shenzhen's housing market is that they have a huge informal housing market, the so-called urban village. And some scholars propose that this kind of so-called urban village become a new route for the road migrants. So I was wondering how many interviewees in your research live in urban village, or they are living the formal housing.
Do you mean how can the urban village relieve migrants' housing problems in the host city?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. And because my thesis is about employer-provided housing in China, I know the government is taking some urban villages back and regenerate them to provide such housing to migrant workers. I think this can relieve some of the housing pressures. But this paper focuses more on hometown housing. So I focus more on discussing how migrants' ontological security is related to their housing in the hometown.
Thanks so much for your questions, everyone. And thank you for your presentation today. You're very insightful. Just a quick reminder that our next webinar series will be next Thursday, so the 10th of July, where we'll hear from Dr. Tim Helm, Dr. Cameron Murray, and Mr. Henry Williams, who will present their research titled "Can Upzoning Improve Housing Affordability? Economic Theory Evidence from Auckland and Value Capture Solutions to Help Capture the Housing Have-Nots." Thank you all for your time today, and I hope you all have a great afternoon. Meeting adjourned.